In 216 BC, Rome was at war with one of the most dangerous enemies it had ever faced. His name was Hannibal Barca, a Carthaginian general who had already shocked the ancient world by crossing the Alps with an army that included war elephants. For years, Hannibal had defeated Roman armies again and again, but Rome refused to surrender. The Romans believed that if they simply raised a larger army, they could finally destroy him. That decision would lead to one of the bloodiest battles of the ancient world, the Battle of Cannae. By the summer of 216 BC, Hannibal had taken control of the important city of Cannae in southern Italy. The city itself was strategically valuable because it gave Hannibal access to enormous Roman grain supplies. Rome could not simply ignore him. The Roman Senate decided that the time had come to destroy the Carthaginian army once and for all. Rome assembled an army unlike almost anything it had fielded before. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers and allied troops marched south. Ancient sources give different numbers, but the Roman force may have numbered around 80,000 men. It was an enormous army, far larger than Hannibal's. The Romans had one simple advantage: numbers. Hannibal knew it, and he also knew exactly how he could use those numbers against them. The Carthaginian army was much smaller, perhaps around 50,000 soldiers. It included African infantry, Iberian and Gallic warriors, cavalry, and experienced veterans who had followed Hannibal for years. Many of them had fought together since the beginning of the Italian campaign. But Hannibal faced another problem. His army was exhausted. They had marched across mountains, fought numerous battles, and survived years of campaigning far from Carthage. Hannibal could not afford a long war of attrition. He needed a victory, and he needed it quickly. The Roman army was commanded by two consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Roman political tradition required the two consuls to share command, and their armies would alternate leadership. This created tension between the commanders, but both understood the basic Roman strategy. They had more men. They would use them. The Roman army formed up on the plain near Cannae. Their infantry was placed in an unusually deep formation, designed to smash through the Carthaginian center. On the Roman flanks stood cavalry, while thousands of allied troops filled the ranks. From the Roman perspective, the battlefield looked almost perfect. The enemy was smaller. The Roman army was massive. The soldiers were confident, and Hannibal had nowhere to hide. But Hannibal had studied his enemy carefully. He knew the Romans preferred direct attacks. He knew they trusted their heavy infantry. And most importantly, he knew that the Romans believed victory came from overwhelming force. So Hannibal created a trap. He placed his weakest-looking troops in the center. Gallic and Iberian infantry formed a curved line that pushed toward the Romans. Behind them stood his African veterans. His cavalry was placed on the wings. The formation looked strange. The center seemed weak. The Romans saw exactly what Hannibal wanted them to see. They believed that if they attacked the center with their massive infantry force, they would crush it. The battle began. Roman and Carthaginian cavalry clashed on the wings while the infantry slowly moved toward one another. Then the Roman soldiers attacked Hannibal's center. Thousands of men pushed forward. The Gallic and Iberian soldiers began falling back. To the Romans, it looked like the plan was working. The Carthaginian center was collapsing, but it wasn't. It was moving exactly where Hannibal wanted it to move. As the Roman infantry advanced, their enormous formation became deeper and deeper. The soldiers behind the front ranks pushed forward, compressing the army into an increasingly crowded mass. The Roman army was winning ground, but with every step forward, It was entering deeper into Hannibal's trap. Then something changed. The Carthaginian center stopped retreating. The African infantry on the sides turned inward. Suddenly, the Romans realized they were surrounded from both sides, but there was still worse to come. Hannibal's cavalry had defeated the Roman cavalry on one side of the battlefield. Those mounted troops now moved toward the rear of the Roman army. The Romans were trapped. In front of them stood Hannibal's infantry. On both sides, Carthaginian soldiers were closing in, and behind them came cavalry. The enormous Roman army had become a prison. Roman soldiers tried to break through the Carthaginian lines, but every attempt failed. Those in the middle could barely understand what was happening around them. The soldiers at the front were fighting, while those behind them pushed forward without realizing that the army was already surrounded. The Carthaginians continued tightening the circle. Men fell, weapons broke, shields collided. The battlefield became chaos, and Hannibal watched as one of the greatest armies Rome had ever assembled slowly collapsed. By the end of the battle, tens of thousands of Romans were dead. Some ancient sources claim losses of around 50,000 to 70,000 men, although the exact number is debated by historians. What is certain is that the Roman army had suffered a catastrophe. It was one of the worst military disasters in Roman history. But Hannibal had not simply defeated Rome, he had destroyed an army that was supposed to destroy him, and now the road to Rome seemed open. For the first time, the Romans had a terrifying question to answer. Could Rome survive? The news of Cannae spread across Italy like a shockwave. Rome had lost. Not simply lost. It had suffered a disaster on a scale that few Romans could remember. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers had been killed. Many Roman commanders were dead. The survivors were scattered across the countryside, desperately trying to escape the battlefield. For Hannibal, this was the greatest victory of his career. He had defeated an army several times larger than his own, and now Rome was vulnerable. The question became obvious. Would Hannibal march on Rome? According to the famous story, one of Hannibal's commanders, Hannibal, urged him to move immediately toward the city. He reportedly believed that if Hannibal marched quickly, Rome could be forced to surrender. But Hannibal did not do it. Why? Historians still debate the decision. Hannibal's army had just fought one of the most brutal battles of the ancient world. His soldiers were exhausted. They had suffered casualties of their own. They also lacked the heavy siege equipment necessary to assault a city as heavily defended as Rome. Rome was not an ordinary city. Its walls were strong. Its population was enormous. And even after Cannae, Rome was not completely defenseless. The Romans understood that they had to survive. They refused to negotiate. They refused to surrender. Instead, Rome did something that would define its future. It raised another army, then another. The Roman Senate refused to admit defeat. New soldiers were recruited from across Italy. Young men were called into service. Experienced veterans were reorganized. Even prisoners and lower-status citizens could be brought into the military effort. Rome had lost one army, so it created another. Hannibal expected the Roman alliance system to collapse after Cannae. Instead, Rome's allies largely remained loyal. This was one of the greatest differences between Hannibal and Rome. Hannibal could destroy Roman armies, but destroying Rome itself was another matter. Rome could replace its soldiers. It could replace its commanders. It could raise new armies again and again. Hannibal's army could not. The Carthaginian general remained extremely dangerous, but his situation slowly became more difficult. He had won enormous victories, Yet he lacked the resources necessary to turn those victories into the destruction of Rome. Rome also changed its strategy. The Romans stopped trying to defeat Hannibal in one massive battle. Instead, they began avoiding him. They attacked his allies. They cut his supply lines. They captured cities that supported Carthage, and they waited. This strategy was associated with Quintus Fabius Maximus, who became famous for refusing to give Hannibal the battle he wanted. It was frustrating, it was slow, but it worked. Hannibal was a master of battlefield tactics. Rome decided that it would stop playing by his rules. Meanwhile, the war continued across Italy. Hannibal won more battles, but the strategic situation slowly turned against him. Rome was simply too large, too wealthy, and too determined. Eventually, the Romans took the fight directly to Carthage. The Roman general Scipio Africanus invaded North Africa. Hannibal was forced to leave Italy and return home. The man who had terrified Rome for more than a decade now had to defend Carthage itself. In 202 BC, Hannibal and Scipio finally met at the Battle of Zama. This time, Hannibal was defeated. The Second Punic War was over. Rome had survived, and its survival changed the history of the Mediterranean. Cannae had shown the world what Hannibal could do, but the aftermath showed something even more important. Rome could survive almost anything. It could lose tens of thousands of soldiers. It could suffer political chaos. It could watch its allies fall. It could face the greatest military commander of the age, and still continue fighting. That is why the Battle of Cannae remains so important. It was not simply a battle where Hannibal defeated a larger army. It was the moment when Rome came closer to destruction than perhaps ever before. Hannibal had created one of the greatest tactical victories in military history. He had used Rome's greatest strength against it. Its enormous army became its weakness. But Rome survived the trap. The city did not fall. The Republic did not surrender. And the war did not end at Cannae. Instead, Rome learned from its defeat. Years later, Rome would defeat Carthage completely. Hannibal's greatest victory became one of the reasons Rome became even stronger, and that is the strange legacy of Cannae. Hannibal won the battle, but Rome won the war. The battlefield near Cannae became a symbol of what a brilliant commander could achieve against overwhelming odds. But it also became a symbol of something else, the terrifying resilience of Rome. Because Rome had been beaten, Rome had been humiliated, Rome had nearly been destroyed, but Rome refused to die, and that refusal would eventually make it the dominant power of the ancient Mediterranean.